Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Since the dawn of civilization, mankind has credited its origins to gods and other visitors from the stars. What if it were true? Did extraterrestrial beings really help to shape our history?
We're here with Emmy Award winner Kevin Burns, among many other shows. He's the executive producer of the new Lost in Space on Netflix, Ancient Aliens, which has been on for quite some time, 13 seasons, 147 episodes plus, and The Curse of Oak Island, all currently on television. Thank you again for being here, Kevin. We're having a great time with Kevin Burns.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Excellent. As you may know, as a big fan of Everything Old is New Again, we devote a number of our shows a year to the topic that we're kind of fascinated with, which is ancient aliens and UFOs and so forth. And it's apparently, certainly, you've got some interest in that as this show that you're executive producer of Ancient Aliens for 13 seasons. You've got to be certainly open-minded, I guess, to the possibility of what is presented on these episodes. What inspired you to get involved with a show that could be in some ways controversial as Ancient Aliens?
Well, I got to do a lot of projects with Lucasfilm, believe it or not. They contacted me back in, I think, 1994 to do what became kind of, I guess, the definitive documentary on the making of the original trilogy, which we called Star Wars Empire of Dreams. And I did that directly with Lucasfilm, and it led to a wonderful relationship with them. And we did Star Wars Tech and Star Wars Creatures and Star Wars The Legacy Revealed. And then when they were doing Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they asked if I would do a documentary about Indiana Jones. But again, these were not making-of documentaries so much as something that would air on television that would kind of thematically tie into it. So I was always intrigued with archaeology. I mean, I'm a history bug. God bless her, my mother used to say I was like a dog who stopped at every tree, meaning I have a lot of different interests. And so I'm a curious person. So I was kind of like, I started with the premise of why do archaeologists do what they do? Why do we dig? And my answer to that is we're a species with collective amnesia. We don't know really where we come from. We don't know how long we've been here. And we are ultimately looking for God, or looking for proof of God, or evidence that there is something bigger than ourselves. So we approached this Indiana Jones documentary like that. We called it Indiana Jones and the Ultimate Quest. And it fit very perfectly with the Indiana Jones films because all of the films previous to Crystal Skull were about the Ark of the Covenant or the Shakira stones from India or the Holy Grail. And then, of course, Lucas wouldn't share with me what Crystal Skull was about. And I said, oh, my God, you can tell from the poster, it's Eric Von Daniken. It's Chariots of the Gods. And, of course, everybody who works for me who's under 30, or actually under 35, was like, what's Chariots of the Gods? Who's Eric Von Daniken? And I said, trust me, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg know exactly who Eric Von Daniken is.
Right.
And I remembered the book, and I remembered the documentary feature that came out in the early 70s, Sun Classic Pictures Presents. And so and then the people from Lucasfilm were freaked out when they saw our documentary, because they said, how did you get a hold of the movie? I said, I didn't. I just knew what it was about from the poster. And, well, anyway, that led to a discussion with the History Channel. I told them this same story, and they said, well, we would love to do an update of Chariots of the Gods. Like, it was the 40th anniversary at the time. This was 10 years ago. It's the 50th anniversary year now. So I found out that Eric von Daniken was alive and well and living in Switzerland, and we did a show which I thought was going to be a 2-hour show, just an update on Chariots of the Gods, which we called Ancient Aliens, and it was really meant to be just a 2-hour special. And it was so successful, the network came back to me and said, would you do 5 more 2-hour shows? And I said, well, how are you going to air them? And they said, well, once a week. I said, no one's going to watch a show 2 hours once a week. It's unheard of. And they said, why, you don't want to do it? I said, well, of course I'll do it. But so I had to really figure out how to make a 2-hour show, five 2-hour shows work. And I came up with the idea of 5 rhetorical questions, which are, if you notice, at the beginning of every episode, which is who were they, where did they come from, what did they leave behind, where did they go, will they return? And that formed the basis for each of the 2 shows. And I thought, well, that's it. We did it. We pulled it off, and they were very well received. And they came back and said, would you do 10 more 1-hour shows? And I said, guys, I'm out of pyramids. I've picked every Nazca line clean. And they said, well, you don't want to do it? And I said, well, of course I'll do it. So 140 episodes later, and I have to say, and I approached the show not as an ancient astronaut theorist. I mean, the narrator very much is, because I wrote virtually every show in the first few years, or co-wrote it or rewrote it. I still, in fact, even today, I'm doing a polish of an upcoming episode. And but I am effectively the voice of the narrator, which is a questioner. The narrator asks questions, and I take a certain amount of pride in that the narrator will never put a period at the end of a sentence if it isn't a fact.
Right.
Now, we're open-minded enough to let the theorists say what they want to say, meaning, and I don't necessarily agree with everything the theorists say, but what I think is the beauty of the show, and it's extraordinary because I don't see any other network that would have the courage to let us do the show this way, because most shows would have, like, well, you have to have a skeptic on. You have to have somebody come on after the theorist and say it's not true or there's no evidence. And I'm like, would you do the nativity of Jesus and have somebody come on and say it's not true?
Right.
No, you wouldn't. And I'm not comparing the two things, and I'm not trying to take Ancient Aliens and make it a religion. But the point is, it's an open-minded approach to the topic, because I do take the position that science and archaeology do not have all the answers, and religion doesn't have all the answers either, but they're both trying to answer the same questions, which is who are we, who made us, where did we come from, what is our purpose here in life? And I think science tries to answer those questions. I think religion tries to answer those questions. And Ancient Aliens, I think, offers not another answer, but a bridge between science and archaeology and religion. It is not, in my opinion, an anti-religious show. It's not an anti-science show. What it is a show that allows people to ask questions, and that is far too rare on today's television.
Exactly, and it is unique in that way, and if you go in with an open mind, you're going to come out of these episodes with at least a question mark in your mind as to, wait a minute, maybe there were aliens in the West back in the day, or because there are.
It is theoretically possible, and I approach the show where there might be 10 different things offered as a theory in an episode. And I may think that 7 of them are like way too far-fetched or very unlikely. But there's always 3 or 4, I have to say, that pick my brain in a way that even me, who makes the show, will go, I can't necessarily say that's not true, or I can't dismiss that out of hand. In other words, and there's a lot of things you realize as you dig into the research. Like, for example, a lot of people think the pyramids of Egypt were tombs or temples. They weren't, and there's absolutely no evidence proving that that's true. They may also be much older than conventional archaeology thinks they are, And when you see them on the inside, there are no hieroglyphs, there are no burial chambers, there were no mummies in them. So then it leaves you with the question of, well, how old are they and what were they for? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that aliens built them or inspired their creation, but there's so many questions that science and archaeology cannot answer that the ancient astronaut theorists offer an intriguing, if not, very audacious counter idea of what our history really could be.
Oh, excuse me, we're going to have to break right here for a hard break for a commercial. We'll be right back with Kevin Burns, executive producer of Curse of Oak Island, Lost in Space, and Ancient Aliens. We'll be right back. Everything old is new again.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
And we're back with the executive producer of Ancient Aliens, and we're discussing the possibility of aliens right here, right now.
And given the fact that we're about to go to Mars and colonize another planet and leave things behind and make our mark on a body in the universe, as we already have on the moon, who are we to say that it's impossible?
Right, and a show like this and these ideas do nothing if nothing else, add color to our lives to present these other ideas, to open our mind, to, like you say, you walk out of any show and there's something that's going to nag at you a little bit and say, well, let me look into that a little bit more, and you may do your own research, or you'll believe Giorgio himself, the gentleman that you see sometimes that the people might recognize with the odd hairstyle and that's on the show.
The electrified hairdo.
Right. But they make it come alive for you.
Well, yeah, and it's weird. I mean, I have to say, my life has expanded in many ways, but it kind of returns to the same thing. I mean, we've done episodes of Ancient Aliens, of Aliens and Vikings, and I'm thinking, God, there was a Lost in Space with Viking aliens. And, you could almost look at every episode of Lost in Space and say, gosh, there's an Ancient Aliens episode that refers right back to this.
There you go.
Whether it's, interdimensions or folklore or the parallels in terms of mythology and archaeology and ancient astronaut theory are pretty incredible.
Right, and you spoke previously a little bit about the narrator being basically your voice. You've got Robert Clotworthy doing Ancient Aliens narration as well as The Curse of Oak Island, which we could pivot a little bit here too for a moment. And I guess the first question is, obviously he does a great job. What was the consideration with having him do both of those?
Well, he did our first Star Wars documentary. He did Star Wars Empire of Dreams, and he became, for me, kind of the perfect voice for Lucasfilm. He did all of our Lucasfilm docs. And so when we did Ancient Aliens, we kind of previewed other voices, and I said, Robert has a gift. He's really a wonderful, wonderful guy to work with. He's an actor. He's been in a lot of movies. But Robert is a very, very, very nice man. But he has a quality to make the absurd sound sane. In other words, when he speaks, you listen, and he can take even the most audacious concept and make it plausible by the way he presents it.
Right.
And in fact, when we started with The Curse of Oak Island, there was really nobody else I wanted, and he's also the voice of another show we do called The Curse of Civil War Gold,
right,
which is about to go into its second season on History Channel. So, Robert is my voice of sanity. That doesn't necessarily mean when I say he speaks kind of for me, because I wouldn't accuse myself of being sane.
Well, we'll join. We'll go down the same path as you do, and call us. The sanity is a subjective term, right? But as far as I'm concerned, if you look at the Curse of Oak Island, which is basically a treasure hunt in Canada's Oak Islands with the brothers Lagunas. Some people say Lagunas, but
Lagunas. It's Rick and Marty Laguna.
There you go.
Yeah.
Where did you find them? And certainly, I think Rick is doing the Civil War show as well, right? From springboarding from there.
Well, Marty is, and that's because Marty was the one who brought the idea to us.
Okay.
Marty found the guy, and it was just a fluke. Somebody met with Marty on an airplane and said, "Do you know about this fellow who's looking for, the Confederate treasury at the bottom of Lake Michigan?" And Marty and his family are very, very kind of Michigan people first and foremost, and so Marty recommended it to us. He said, "Do you know about this fella?" So I said, "Well, if we do anything with this, Marty, I would love to have you be part of it with us because you were the one who first thought it was a good idea." And, the secret of any good show is not only a good idea and good execution, but to me, they're about people. I mean, a good show is always about people. Lost in Space succeeds because you like the people. The Munsters succeeded because you liked the family. You loved them. And I think if you find characters who you want to spend an hour with and you care about what happens to them, that's the key to a good television show. It's not just storytelling. It's also about an emotional connection that the audience needs to have with somebody they're going to watch every week. The key to Oak Island, I mean, you asked me how I found them, and I had heard about Oak Island and the mystery of Oak Island from a programming director at the History Channel, about 10 years ago. And at the time, we were told, well, it's a very interesting story, but the island is controlled by a couple of guys who hate each other, and there's no way you're going to be able to get the film done, or you're not going to be able to get access to the island. And we did Ancient Aliens, and in that first group of 5 two-hour shows, we did a segment, if you remember, on Oak Island. And we'd never been to the island. We didn't shoot anything on the island, but we did it about a legend about the Ark of the Covenant being perhaps one of the treasures that could be there. And in the course of it, I was reminded of it, and I said, I'm really going to try, even if these guys are hard to deal with, I'm going to try. And then I found out that there were 2 new partners that had come in since I first heard about the island, and that there were these 2 brothers from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Rick and Marty Lagina, who were kind of 50% stakeholders in the island and who had come into it. And I literally went with a guy that I work with, Joe Lassard. We drove 5.5 hours. We flew to Detroit from California. We drove 5.5 hours to Traverse City. And I had dinner with Marty and Rick and Craig Tester and Alan, their partner. And we had dinner. And at that dinner, I found out why Rick and Marty, particularly Rick, were enamored with Oak Island. And it was, again, it had to do with what I tend to be very, very open to, being the kid who loved the Munsters and Lost in Space and Batman. Rick was a 10-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy, actually, who read the Reader's Digest, the 1965 Reader's Digest. And that story about Oak Island in the Reader's Digest made him a total fan, and all his life he read about it, he studied about it, he brought all of his family members, he used to bore them at holidays and Thanksgiving about Oak Island. And then finally his younger brother Marty, who remembered his brother's love of it, Marty became a very, very successful and very wealthy energy company executive, and he finds out there's an island, 50% ownership of Oak Island was for sale. And he went to his brother and said, "How'd you like to buy Oak Island?" And when I heard that story at dinner, Joe and I looked at each other, and I was like, "That's it, that's it." And they really did not want to be on television. They really did not want to be, they just didn't want to do it. And I said, "I will know how to tell your story better than anybody else." And they said, "Why?" I said, "Because I was a 10-year-old boy who loved a show called Lost in Space. And I now control the rights to it. And I know what it means to touch your childhood dream." And I said, that's the point of view I will take in telling this story. Because they were afraid that I was going to do what other reality shows do, which I don't do, which is to make them look bad or make them look like hicks or hillbillies, which of course they were not.
Right.
But they were afraid I was going to do something that would mock them or make them look foolish for looking for this 223-year-old treasure. And I said, no, on the contrary, I respond to the dream you have. This, to me, is Lord of the Rings. This is the Fellowship of the Dig, which Rick, used that phrase. And this is Goonies. This is Fellowship of the Ring. And that was what convinced them to trust us to do the show the way we do it. And it is the most successful show on the History Channel and the number one show on cable on Tuesday nights when it runs. I mean, it's actually the number one reality show of the week, and it has been for the last 4 years. So, but I attribute it not only to the fact that we work really hard. I have a wonderful, wonderful team of producers on the island. We spend 6 months a year up there filming. It's very challenging to make the show work, but I have a great cast of characters. I mean, Marty, Rick, Greg, Dave Blankenship, Dan, his father. Dan's 95 years old. He's got to be the oldest TV star. I used to think Hugh Hefner was the oldest TV star. Now I have Dan Blankenship.
Right.
But that's why the show works, is people love the characters.
And it works also in the light of, now we know those characters. We know some characters, certainly the people that are introducing the topics and talking about the topics on Ancient Aliens. So now it seems like I'm hearing, based on an artifact that was found on Oak Island, that there may be a crossover episode between Ancient Aliens and Curse of Oak Island. Is that possible?
Not likely. There are a lot of objects on Oak Island that are extraordinary. I wouldn't say that they were extraterrestrial or connected in any way to ancient astronaut theory, although I will say this, there are a lot of ancient astronaut theorists who believe that they have a key to solving the mystery based on a lot of astrological information and things. And there are some people from Ancient Alien, actually Dr. Travis Taylor, who's been a recent guest on Ancient Aliens, who's got 2 PhDs, and he's a NASA astrophysicist. I mean, he's a very, very smart guy. He was in another show we did called The Tesla Files. And we sent him up there because he has a very ingenious idea of what might have been buried there and where it might have been buried. So there's some crossover, but not necessarily because of something that has been found.
All right, understood. We'll keep an eye out on both of these shows and be back right in a few moments with Kevin Burns to finish off our time, talk about some more pop culture entertainment, and enjoy our time together. We'll be back right after this, and Everything Old is New Again.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani, David Cohen. David, just for the heck of it, trivia question. Do you recognize that theme song?
Yes, I do.
From the 60s. Where do you recognize it from?
I believe that's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Exactly. Another great, with Richard Bracehart and David Hennessy. We're going to get back to that in a few moments. Right now, we are enjoying our time with Emmy Award winner, executive producer, director, writer of many, many shows, including but not limited to the new Lost in Space, Ancient Aliens, and The Curse of Oak Island. Mr. Kevin Burns, thank you again for spending so much time with us, Kevin.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
And does that, you must hear that theme song every so often in your mind? Is that you're associated with, and I think you said you have the rights to many, if not all, of the Irwin Allen projects. Is that correct, or properties?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that Irwin had rights or shared in rights to the things that he created, my partner John Jashney and I, we have a company called Synthesis Entertainment that has been kind of in charge of not only developing these properties as remakes or feature films, but also all the licensing, all the merchandising. If you know, the soundtrack albums, we're about to do a 50th anniversary soundtrack album for Land of the Giants, by the way, through La La Land Records. We did the 50th anniversary Lost in Space soundtrack collection, and so I loved Irwin Allen's work. I felt that it was in danger of being either not so much forgotten, but not as respected as it should have been. Irwin was quite an extraordinary character, trying to make basically big screen movies on television with very, very, very challenging budgets, and succeeded far better than anyone else who'd ever tried before him. So, there wouldn't be Star Trek if there wasn't Lost in Space. We wouldn't have seen a lot of the science fiction on television that we enjoyed later, because Irwin was the pioneer who proved it could be done when everybody thought it couldn't be done. And so we have a tremendous amount of respect for him.
Tell you, if you really know the breadth of the work of Irwin Allen and see the effect even to this day, I wonder, just throwing it out there off the top of my head, it seems like it might be a pretty good idea for a biopic down the line, no? Take a look behind the scenes of what he did?
Very, very possibly. I mean, again, we've got a book coming out. Taylor White, who has a store and a website called Creature Features, he's published a handful of books and done a lot of stuff on Star Trek and The Outer Limits. And he approached me, along with Jeff Baum, to do a book called The Fantasy Worlds of Irwin Allen, which had always been a dream of ours, to do a big, big book. It's like a 550-page book, because we have, again, as I mentioned earlier, access to Irwin's archives with all the paintings and all the artwork and all the storyboards and all the letters. And so this promises to be an incredible visual explosion, this book, because Irwin was so visual, and we have original concept art for how he originally envisioned the Jupiter 2 and the Sea View, and these amazing paintings, and how he sold his shows. And a lot of things came out that I didn't quite know beforehand, and I've known a lot about Irwin, and that he really invented the first celebrity panel show, the first celebrity radio show, the first game show on television. He started out as a radio guy who then became one of the early television personalities here in Los Angeles, and then became a producer for RKO, an agent. We found love letters between him and Joan Crawford from the 1940s, which was quite astounding. And then in the 1950s, he became more and more of his own producer, doing everything from the sea around us and the animal world to the big circus, and then of course in the early 60s, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, 5 Weeks in a Balloon, based on Jules Verne, the Lost World, based on H.G. Wells, and then parlayed that into television. So, and then later, after Lost in Space, Time, Tunnel, Land of the Giants, and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, he did the highest-grossing film of 1972, which was The Poseidon Adventure,
sure,
and then the highest-grossing film of 1974, which was The Towering Inferno. So he was really an amazingly prolific and extraordinarily gifted producer who created very indelible and very visual experiences for audiences.
And his vision and his projects are living on through your work and participation in Lost in Space, Poseidon, the movie in 2006, Time Tunnel 2002. You did a project with that. Question is, there's still out there the Land of the Giants, and I know you only have so much time, but to your day, and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I guess there's always possibilities. Are there possibilities down the line that these may be reimagined at some point?
Yes, especially after the success of Lost in Space. We always have an eye toward developing all of these properties. Some of them, have different challenging rights issues. I mean, 20th Century Fox was Irwin's partner on Time Tunnel, Land of the Giants, and Voyage, and so the question is, do we develop them with Fox, which is now owned by Disney very recently? In other words, will they become our partner? Will we do them independent of those studios? Legendary which was housed at Warner Brothers Legendary, through John and I, purchased Irwin's rights to these properties. Legendary now owns Lost in Space and produces it for Netflix. And John was, for a while, the president of Legendary and the chief creative officer. And so, on the strength of that, we brought the properties in with Sheila Allen's blessing and the blessing after she passed away of her family and her estate. And then we developed it with Legendary. So working with Legendary, I mean, you know, we're John and I are kind of attached to these properties for the foreseeable future, but working with Legendary, possibly working with Fox or Disney, yes, I would say the possibility exists for all of these properties to come back.
That's exciting, and then it sounds like that certainly we know that they're in good hands. I want to pivot a little bit, too, back to Lost in Space on Netflix here. The first season ended with quite a few questions and a point towards a certain direction where they're going to go. I know that, you know, you'll be limited, but is there anything you could tell us about either the tone or what we can expect from Season 2 with respect to Lost in Space on Netflix?
Well, what was great is when John and I started working with Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless, the writers of the first two episodes and several episodes afterwards, they became kind of our creative partner. And then, of course, Zach Estrin came in as the showrunner. And we form, I would say, the nucleus of where the creative direction of the show goes. But Matt and Burke had a very ambitious, I would say, 3 to 5 year story, even when we were pitching the very first episode. And we didn't know it would be on Netflix. I mean, we pitched it to every network with an eye toward Netflix, but we went to CBS, we went to Fox, we went to NBC. But Matt and Burke always had a very, very big vision. So season 1 kind of tells the story of how the family, along with Don West and Dr. Smith and the robot, kind of come together. Season 2, I don't want to give anything away, but extends that and enriches that, because now when you have, in a sense, your core group, your 7 characters, Season 2 is about the struggle for those characters to stay together. And that, I think, is a very exciting way of approaching Season 2.
Hey, Kevin, you know, with the original Lost in Space TV show, you know, as you were watching all 3 seasons, you pretty much knew that nothing terrible was going to happen to any of the family members or any of the cast members. Every time they faced a new, you know, challenge, some evil entity or person, they were always going to come out on top. So now, you know, with today's serial TV shows, you never know what's going to happen. So my question is, how do you guys work within that context where you're sort of juxtaposing it against the old TV show where it was kind of predictable? How do you envision adding an element of surprise to this new enterprise?
Well, I think, you know, I don't think there's any serious thought. I don't want to give anything away, but I don't think there's any serious thought to eliminating one of the core characters. I mean, one of the things that John and I were very strong about when we started this was, you know, look, they have to be Robinsons. They have to have a ship called the Jupiter 2. There has to be a robot. There has to be a chariot. And there has to be Will, Judy, Don, Penny, you know, John, Maureen, and Dr. Smith. I mean, you know, there are certain things that make it Lost in Space. And so it's almost like Superman. You know, you have to have Lois Lane. You have to have Jimmy Olsen. Otherwise, it's not Superman.
And, of course, without commercials, we are not. Everything Old is New Again on the radio and an existing radio show. So we'll be back right after this with Kevin Burns to talk all things pop culture, including Lost in Space.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
And we're back with Kevin Burns talking all things the new Netflix show Lost in Space, and wondering if we are going to be seeing a elimination of any of the characters we do see sometimes in television today.
So I don't think we're giving any thought to eliminating characters, but are these characters going to evolve? Are the characters at risk? Could they disappear for a while and come back? Could they evolve beyond where the original TV show took them. So I think that's the hope, is that they will take surprising turns now that we've established them. We can see where they would have gone, maybe where Owen would have taken them had the show lasted longer.
Certainly the robot was a huge influence back in the day with me. I'd be in school drawing pictures of the robot, and I could still draw them to this day down to the little power pack on the right side. So the question is, you did change a bit of the backstory, let's say, to the robot and the character, but it's a lot of the essential elements remain the same. How did you take on again a second iconic character in the same television show and tackle that to ensure that it was fresh and new as it is now?
Well, again, certain things we didn't want to change, like the family and the dynamics of the Robinsons. I mean, we knew it was going to be a family who loved each other. You know, we didn't want the dysfunctional family. I think New Line, I think one of the reasons why it didn't work is the casting I didn't think was good. I mean, it wasn't right. It wasn't the right chemistry between those actors. And, the kids were kind of repellent in some respects. So I think casting was a big part of this. But in terms of taking the other characters, what I would call the orbiting characters, because you have the five Robinsons, but then you have Smith, you have Don West, and you have the robot, and who are the outsiders, effectively, who are looking to be part of a family, but they are the outsiders. The robot was a huge gamble. I would say that more than making Smith a female character, making the robot an alien robot was a huge gamble. But part of that was also done because the original Smith, Jonathan Harris, and the original robot were so indelible and so beloved that rather than try to stick to that, we took what I think was a bolder but more successful strategy of saying, let's not compare it. Let's go somewhere totally different. And we also knew that there were going to be other Earth colonists, and we didn't want all of them to have a robot. So the idea that the Robinsons bring a robot that's kind of assigned to them, if you extrapolated that, then all the Jupiter families would have a robot, and we didn't want that. So Matt and Burke came up with the idea that the robot be an alien robot, and John and I were big, big, big fans of Iron Giant, and we always knew that we wanted the dynamic between Will and the robot to be the heart of the show, and that the boy and his robot, that kind of Iron Giant quality, was very much intentional. So I would say the toughest decision we made, of all the very tough decisions, was what's that robot going to look like? And I credit, Zach and Neil Marshall coming up with, and we came up with there were outrageous notions of what it was going to look like. But it had to be kind of humanoid because audiences relate, you're not going to relate to it otherwise. So it had to kind of have a physical shape. We didn't want it to look, like Iron Man or a Marvel character. We tried to make it original. And we also wanted it to evoke the original robot by having the bubble face, the bubble head, effectively. And we were scared, I have to say, which is why we were so closeted about what everything was going to look like. We didn't want people to see the ship or the Smith or the robot, because, I'm a fan of the original show, and even though the fan base, has aged over time and passed away over time, you wanted them to love the show too. I mean, I wanted this Lost in Space to be, again, the show that Irwin Allen would have done if he'd had the opportunity. But we kept it quiet because we just didn't want the hate mail that we feared we might get. And I have to say, one of the things that we're all really happy about is how the robot has been so embraced, and I have to say, the way the robot is portrayed, the way he interacts with Will Robinson, played by Max Jenkins, who does a brilliant job. All the actors do a brilliant job, but Max, who has a really tough job for a 10, 12-year-old kid, to interact with something that, no surprise, is either a guy in the suit or something entirely that you can't see. Because sometimes the robot is CGI, sometimes it's an enhanced version of a guy in a suit. And Max has to make that real, and the guy in the robot, Brian Steele, has to make that real. And they do an extraordinary job.
And as a whole, the whole cast really does pull it off. And we've had Toby Stevens on the show, although he doesn't know it. We had him on. I interviewed him at a comic book convention a little ways back when he was with Black Sails. He's terrific, and Molly Parker is great as his wife.
And by the way, I had dinner with the cast up in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, and Toby sat there, and I was talking to Molly, and he goes, "You do Ancient Aliens?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "I love that show," and he said, "Oh my God, that's my favorite show." He says, I saw the one last week about Vikings, and I just thought, wow, that's really cool. No, I mean we do Alien Con now. There's a convention now based on Ancient Aliens, and Max was there with Bill Mumy and Marta Kristen, and Nina Sunwall was there, the girl who plays Penny, and that was great. In fact, before the premiere at the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood, there was Netflix threw like a premiere, like a red carpet premiere, and it was actually a black carpet. But anyway, but I had dinner the night before. John and I hosted a dinner with those cast members who could come, and Parker came, and Ignacio came, and Max and Nina. Taylor couldn't come, and Molly and Toby couldn't come, but we had Marta Kristen and Mark Goddard and Angela and Billy. And, of course, Billy had met the cast because he was up there doing his part. But the other three original cast members got to meet, their new counterparts for the first time. And it was an extraordinary evening, and it was a real love fest. And to watch, Angela Cartwright interact with Mina, who plays Penny now, and Ignacio and Mark Goddard were just like, they were brothers. And it was just so heartwarming because the original characters, they carried the torch for a long time.
Right.
And if you don't already know this, there was talk originally of what's the voice of the robot going to be, and could we use Dick Tufeld's voice for the robot? And I suggested that they use Max's voice, that Max Jenkins be processed to be the robot, because the robot would only have heard a human voice for the first time, spoken by Will Robinson, and that is the voice.
Wow.
That Danger Will Robinson is Max Jenkins.
Oh, wow.
Oh, we're going to call that a scoop for Everything Old is New Again.
Yeah.
We'll lead with that.
But
that is very interesting.
But that dinner you had, that the fanboy in you must have been, it must have been your dream, right? The old cast, the new cast, you had something to do with all this.
One of the things, funny, I met Bill Mumy in 1989 when I had just started working at 20th Century Fox. Bill came to my office, and it was a very tentative meeting. I really just wanted some excuse to kind of meet with him because I was such a Lost in Space fan. And he came on the lot, which was like his alma mater. And he came to my office, and I often say to Bill, if Bill hadn't been such a great guy, none of this would have happened, because I wouldn't have wanted to do it. And he came into my office, and he sees on my desk, my mom had given me a little dish with Pez dispensers in it. And Bill says, "You have Pez?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "You have Softhead Penguin and Batman and Joker Pez?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Oh, I've never seen those." And I gave them to him. Well, we became very, very close friends ever since. And it was through Bill that I got to meet Jonathan and the rest of the cast and work with them and do reunions. And we used to have lunch at 20th Century Fox about 2 to 3 times a year. We'd have dinner on occasion. We had regular dinners with Jonathan and his wife Gertrude. And there was a family feeling that I got to know the people from Batman and the Munsters and every TV show I ever loved as a kid. But there was an extraordinary bond with the Lost in Space people, and I think primarily because it was these people were playing a family. And it was really great when Bill went up to Vancouver to do his part as the, quote, real Dr. Smith. And he went out to dinner with the cast, and he said to them, "You guys don't understand, but you're going to be bonded together as a family for the rest of your lives." And it's great because I have to say, even going up there for dinner a couple of weeks ago, it's absolutely true. It's hard to play the Robinson and even Dr. Smith and Don West and not feel part of that family. It is an extraordinary thing. And so it's nice that that tradition continues.
And it's an extraordinary show, Lost in Space on Netflix. You got to see it.
So these are like 10-hour movies. They're produced almost like Star Wars movies or James Bond movies, meaning they're hugely ambitious. They're very expensive, but they become events. And so some people have said, why do we have to wait so long? And it's like, well, you had to wait that long for Star Wars. You had to wait that long for Star Trek. You had to wait that long for James Bond. I mean, this is 10 hours, not 2.
Right.
So, Zach has an enormously difficult job. The writers do a great job. I mean, everybody works really, really hard. But the effects and everything are very challenging. So, yeah, I mean, I could imagine they do a lot of little behind-the-scenes interstitials.
Well, listen, I'll tell you, we've had a great time. We're talking with someone who has touched their childhood dream, executive producer of Lost in Space, Ancient Aliens, Curse of Oak Island, and more, Kevin Burns. Thank you very much for your time. We're just elated that we've had the opportunity to speak with you and look forward to possibly down the line speaking more in other adventures that you go down.
Well, anytime. I look forward to it.
We'll be back next week to talk all things entertainment, pop culture, talk show. Douglas Viviani, David Cohen on Everything Old is New Again. Been talking to Kevin Burns. Had a great time. Here's a theme to the new Lost in Space. See you next week.